Happy day. So we began with a review this morning. We were looking at how the latter rain message opened. And what we wanted to demonstrate was how seemingly different messages are connected. Reform lines in Daniel 11:40 to 45. It's one message. 25:20 and time setting. Arms down. 25:20 and time setting are connected. One study. King of the North, King of the South. And equality. One study. They're connected. So we went back to the beginning. Acts 27. It was used as the cause. Acts 27 unlocked the history of Pyrrhus. And that link was first identified through the number 273. But we don't take this number, the waymark, and cut it out of a line. It connects a whole line with another whole line. We need to remember how it does that. So we have these two lines. Acts 27 took us to Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus, the study of the king of the south. When we looked at Pyrrhus, we looked at the Pyrrhic War and the Fourth Diadochi War. They gave us two witnesses that could connect us to World War II and World War III. So I emphasized in the last class how at each step we have multiple witnesses. The study of this triple application developed over 2.5 years. And this is the resulting structure. You can put the Pyrrhic War to one side. It served as a second witness. And we still apply it. But the structure is the Third and Fourth Diadochi Wars. Give a witness for World War I and World War II. So we have two witnesses for this triple application. One witness here in the breakdown of Alexander's empire. One witness here with World War I and World War II. We can combine them to understand World War III. We're given extra information because World War III doesn't start in 1989. So it's going to give us some history that leads to World War III. World War III ends at Panium, which lines up with 1989. The defeat of the king of the south. Daniel 11:40. But the king of the south falls progressively. From the deadly wound of 89 to the death of 91. But the war ends here. So we have this extra war. Pyrrhus versus Lysimachus, which was a Cold War. The United States versus the Soviet Union, which was a Cold War. It shows us that while World War III ends at Panium, the deadly wound is at Panium, it'll take time for the King of the South to die at Sunday Law. So this study extends before and after World War III. It gives us information on both sides. So we began to lay out these wars in the order they were revealed. First was these two, Pyrrhic War, Fourth Diadochi War. So we laid that out. King of the North takes the satellite states. That began in 1989. The United States started taking the satellite states of the Soviet Union. Satellite states such as Afghanistan, Ukraine, Poland. We know it's progressive from 89 to 91. This is the Fourth Diadochi War, which we lined up with World War II. It's the second part of our triple application. Both the first and the second take us from the time of the end to the Sunday Law. But the focus of the second is on the latter half. Most of the information it gives is for this history. For World War I, this side, most of the focus is on this history. So, the King of the North took the satellite states, and then everyone is surprised when they go into an alliance. And we find 2014, an alliance, what is called collusion, between Trump and Putin, the King of the North and the King of the South. Then we have the Battle of Ipsus. The King of the North is going to begin a war on the Western Front. He's going to attack 3 allies. You will see at Ipsus, Antigonus and Demetrius attacking 3 allies. And the King of the South, Pyrrhus, is supporting the King of the North, Demetrius. So we find a battle or war where the King of the North and the King of the South are allies. This sparks the beginning of war on the Western Front. The 2016 election, the King of the North, Trump, began a war on the Western Front. And in this, he's supported by the King of the South, Vladimir Putin. And he's taking on 3 allies. He has a mission to destroy 3 allies. The 3 branches of the US government. That's what's under attack. The executive branch is taken quickly, just like Poland. Then he has an ongoing war with the legislative branch and the judicial branch. Just as Hitler had an ongoing war with France and Britain. So 3 allies. 3 allies, 3 allies. One falls quickly. Poland, the executive branch, and an ongoing war with the others. So a war begins here on the Western Front. This alliance between the King of the North and the King of the South was damaged here. Battle of Heraclea. A small battle in preparation of the large one. The pact is broken. A strain in the alliance between Hitler and Stalin. In preparation of war on the Eastern Front. So 2016 begins war on the Western Front that extends until Panium. So this is the war on the Western Front. War on the Eastern Front begins in 2019. Two-front war. Donald Trump versus the West, including the institutions of his own country. Donald Trump versus Vladimir Putin. An alliance. They fight in concord. A breakdown in their alliance. They go to war. The war ends. We would normally call the beginning and end of that war on the Eastern Front Raphia and Panium. War begins, war ends. 1945, the war ends. It's Beneventum, the defeat of the King of the South. The King of the South progressively falls until the Sunday Law. And this is described as a Cold War. Argos means harvest. And this begins the harvest of the world. So we have all of these symbols. I just want to note, we have 6 battles on this line. Gabine, Ipsus, Heraclea, Asculum, Beneventum, Argos. Gabini is 1 because the elephants create a distraction. Ipsus is 1 because the elephants separate the king from his army. Heraclea is 1 because of the elephants the Roman never seen before. Asculum is 1 because of the action of the elephants. Beneventum is 1
Beneventum dan.
because the elephants of Pyrrhus turn on him. Pyrrhus dies at Argos because elephants block his way of escape. So we have 6 historical battles. And the conclusion of each of those battles, all 6 of them, is because of the mode of warfare. The mode of warfare is symbolized by the elephant from here until here. And that was an important part of the message. Because people are waiting for a hot war. The same people who were fighting that there would be a hot war, who were saying it's going to start as an information perhaps, but end as a hot war, are the same ones misusing lines to say Islam is going to use a nuclear weapon. Already fought them on mode of warfare. And they accepted this, pretended to accept information warfare, but they refused to commit. By the time we had pushed it to where they accepted that this battle here will not be a hot war, based on all of this evidence, the time of the end, that battle, and so much evidence, they still argued it'll end as a hot war between the United States and Russia. But information war is symbolized by the elephant. It was elephants at time of the end, 1989. The Battle of Gabini. It is all the way through till Argos. It's consistent. So in so many ways, there are so many cracks through the methodology of the people that argue with these studies. We were here when we taught this is an information war. And we said we had 2 witnesses, 1989 and 2016. We're here. Now we have 4 witnesses who has been demonstrated to be correct. Them or us? We had 2 witnesses. 2 witnesses was not enough for them. Despite it being a rule. When people can't accept 2 witnesses, 4 witnesses make no difference. We've been through 4 of 6 battles. And there's still no hot war. It's gotten to the point of madness. Now Elder Jeff is teaching that 2020, in 2020, becomes Panium. They're bringing it a year forward to what we teach. Because they believe it's that one waymark is a progressive waymark. I get that the history is progressive, but a waymark is not progressive. A waymark is not a period of 18 months. You might argue 12 months. One waymark is not 2 years. Because he cannot concede on any point to what we teach, he will argue Panium is in 2020. It begins in a few months. And what does he teach about Raphia? They claimed that it was them that understood November 9. I don't know how they justify that to themselves. But back here, I was waiting. Back here, prior to November 9, they said they came up with that date. So I said, that's fine. Keep the date. But I knew they have the type of methodology that comes up with craziness, like a hot war battle. And I knew this is the cross. It looks like defeat. They're looking for the wrong things on this day, and nothing would happen that they could see. As you would expect, November 9 passed. They saw nothing. They mocked like those before the cross, saying, look what just became of your movement. Look at your false prophet on a tree. He said he was the Messiah. You said you were the true movement. And you've just been crushed. So the Pharisees mocked. FFA mocked. But they made a mistake. They laid claim to this date. So the problem they face is they had agreed this was Raphia. So they might not like our explanation, which is based on consistency, proxy wars, information war. They don't like our explanation, but what's theirs? Where's their Raphia? So what they do, they say there is no external event at this waymark. What have they just done to the Battle of Raphia? They say no external event. But then they say Panium is coming. So they're going to teach Panium as an external event, but they no longer teach that Raphia is an external event. Something that mad. No intelligent person in the world would accept that. It's foolishness. But their followers say, okay, whatever you say, we'll swallow. They have no problem teaching Panium. It's 5 months away. And there's no Battle of Raphia on the date they claimed to come up with. They're forced into that situation. And instead of Panium being about the king of the north and the king of the south, because they can no longer teach the king of the north and the king of the south, the only message they have is Islam. Because they have fallen off the path, they've become part of the wicked world, which is Trump's America. Does Trump condemn Putin or Russia? No. Apostate Protestants have a message based on attacking Islam. So when FFA fall off the path, become apostate Protestants, the only message they can teach is to attack Islam. But the Battle of Panium is between the King of the North and the King of the South. Islam is separate to that. But I just want us to see how they've had to strike raffia from the line. They've had to do that because they've systematically rejected this message. They were rejecting that in October 2018. All the parts they didn't like information war. Accepting a part, but not the whole. Saying it starts as an information war, but based on no evidence whatsoever, it'll turn into a hot war sometime in the future. So 6 battles, every single one is won in the same way. Poland, the election, pact broken. September to December 2018. Culminating on December 19. That's been in the public record for over a year. Then the war begins. Now we have Trump versus Putin. War on the Eastern Front. The former allies go to war. We'll refer back to that when we lay in World War I. But this is victory for the King of the South. 2021, victory for the King of the North. And then the King of the South progressively falls to the Sunday law. So that's the brief application of this side. It's focusing on Trump and Putin. From their alliance, Trump fighting the West. That's internal, the rising up of a dictator. The breakdown of their alliance. The victory of the King of the South. Then the defeat of the King of the South. Then we began to tie in the Third Diadochi War and World War I. This focuses mainly on the first half. Again, this is the history of Antigonus and Demetrius versus the Allies. 2 superpowers, Antigonus and Eumenes. Antigonus has 2 allies. This is 2 superpowers. 2 superpowers. United States and the Soviet Union. United States has 2 allies. Fighting within the eastern satellite states for control of those states. Eumenes is overthrown from the inside. Soviet Union from the inside. Seleucus supports. Papacy supports. Python fights in his army. Mujahideen fight in the army. Python increases in power. Antigonus becomes a dictator. He's too powerful. He's no longer under restraint. And he starts killing off anyone who's a threat until he kills Python. The Third World War I will add more detail, but the United States began to act like a dictator. In here we have the Iraq War, the Gulf War. First Iraq War. It began to act like a dictator, and it wasn't working with the United Nations. It was controlling the United Nations. Should give us a clue of what we expect to see from Panium to Sunday Law. So the United States starts to act like a dictator. In this history, Python is rising in power, and Seleucus begins to turn against him. Their alliance breaks down. In this history, the Mujahideen become the Taliban. They're not a terrorist organization. They are an Islamic government that's very strict. And the papacy sees the United States become a dictatorship. Their alliance crumbles. So people might argue how the United States is in an alliance with the papacy. And they go to 1989 to prove that. By 1990, that alliance, known as the Holy Alliance, between Reagan and John Paul, is collapsing. The United States and the papacy have not been in an alliance from here. The United States began to act like a dictatorship, and John Paul turned against them, just as Seleucus turned. Then the United States overthrew the Taliban, their former ally. Antigonus killed Python, his former ally. At this point, everyone gets wary of Antigonus. So they send him an ultimatum. They say to Antigonus, stop acting like a dictator over all of us. So 3 allies send an ultimatum to Antigonus. Those 3 allies were Seleucus, Cassander, and Lysimachus. And they tell Antigonus, stop acting like a dictator. All of us generals should work together as equals. The behavior of America after 9/11 began to cause concern within the UN. Three allies came together. Sorry, I want to make a difference. That's Ptolemy, not Seleucus. Seleucus by this stage has lost all power because of Antigonus. Papacy lost all power because of the United States. This is Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachus. One of those three is the king of the south, Ptolemy. They tell Antigonus, treat us like we're all equals. We can rule together. We can divide up the conquered land together. Solve problems together as equals. So the United States is acting like a dictator. They've gone to war in Afghanistan. They want to go to war in Iraq, overthrow Saddam Hussein. And the UN says to America, stop acting like a dictator. We are the United Nations. We can solve these problems together. We can unite, make decisions together. And those three allies who gave America this ultimatum were Russia, France, and Germany. One of them's the king of the south. So we need to consider our understanding of the UN, because it was the United States that was saying to the UN, we do not work with you as equals. If we want to invade Iraq, we will invade Iraq. And you're either with us or you're against us. And in 2003, they invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein. So these three allies send an ultimatum to Antigonus. He rejects that ultimatum, and instead he invades the sphere of influence of the king of the south. So Antigonus doesn't invade Egypt directly. He invaded the territory that was under the influence of Ptolemy. The United States didn't attack Russia. They invaded Iraq. And for decades, Iraq was under the sphere of influence of first the Soviet Union and then Russia. So they invaded the sphere of influence. I said before, World War I, the Third Diadochi War, focus on the early history. They begin the war here. The next major battle of this time period is here. This is Demetrius versus Ptolemy, king of the north versus the king of the south. but it's the son of Antigonus. That young, inexperienced king who would not follow the advice of any generals, who was completely arrogant and thought he could take down Ptolemy, who had decades of experience and fought under Alexander. So you have this battle. It's known as the Battle of Gaza. The Battle of Gaza, Demetrius fights Ptolemy. Demetrius is defeated. Ptolemy wins. And Demetrius is crushed. We don't have the time to go through all of the details. I just want us to note that what they're fighting over is not Egypt. If this is Egypt, what they're fighting over is this territory. This is all the spheres of influence. Up here is known as Coal Syria. You've probably heard us speak of it. But this is a territory everyone wants to control. So they're not fighting over their own countries. They're fighting over these separate spheres of influence. Which is why when we talk about Trump and Putin fighting, we're rarely talking about Russia or the United States. They're fighting over Venezuela, Syria, Ukraine, all of these different territories. Powerful spheres of influence. So we have the Battle of Gaza. It's also known as the Battle of Raphia. It's not the Battle of Raphia of Daniel 11. But this territory of Gaza is also known as Raphia. So this battle is known as the Battle of Raphia, but a different Raphia. And it lines up with the Battle of Raphia. So I don't want us to become confused. This battle is not the battle of Ptolemy and Seleucus in Daniel 11. But because of the location where it's fought, it is also known as the Battle of Raphia. And on our lines, it lines up with the Raphia of Daniel 11. So Ptolemy, the king of the south, wins. He takes all of this sphere of influence. But then his father comes back, joins him. And they take all of this. The king of the north, Antigonus, and his son march down and take all of this territory. If you look to the history, it'll say he takes control of the territory all the way to the border of Egypt. What does that remind us of? All the language of Daniel 11 that we already connect to Panium. This went to the borders. 1989 went to the borders. 1989 is Panium. Panium, it only goes to the borders. You don't need to take the country to destroy it as a superpower. The King of the South was dead in 1991. Russia itself did not need to fall. So to the borders, to the borders. The Ptolemies defeated all the way to the border. At this point in time, the King of the North is tempted to take Egypt. Why not just keep going and take Egypt? But there's two reasons he won't do that. Two reasons he's distracted. The first reason, Nabateans. They are harassing him. Not war, but they're launching attacks on his army. Where did the Nabateans come from? They're the direct descendants of Ishmael. So he has a problem with the descendants of Ishmael. Second problem, rise of Seleucus. Seleucus is beginning to become powerful. While Antigonus is distracted with this war with Ptolemy, Seleucus sneaks to Babylon and takes over. So in the midst of all of this distraction, Seleucus rapidly grows in power. So there's two threats he faces. The descendants of Ishmael and the rise of Seleucus. There's two threats the United States will face that will put a restraint on its war with Russia. One is the descendants of Ishmael, Islam. The second is the rise of the papacy. The papacy is going to rise from Panium to Sunday law. This is what is known as the Babylonian War. A war where Antigonus and Seleucus fight for control of Babylon, because Seleucus wants power. And does Antigonus easily give it to him? Or does he have to fight for it? He has to fight for it. So when we talk about the United States and the papacy, they went into an alliance here. But what happened is John Paul started to having to fight for power because the United States will not give it to him. And the papacy was too weak. John Paul was too weak. They're still in their scattering time. They haven't resurrected. They're torn by internal division. And we focus on the alliance between Reagan and John Paul. And we forget that they fought. Directly after 1989, as John Paul wanted power, and the United States would not give it to him. And he failed to gain that power. Remember the counterfeit. This is 1888. It's failure for the papacy. They're going to fight again for power. This does not look like secret friends. Seleucus and Antigonus were not meeting in the basement, being secret friends. They fought. The papacy wants power at the end of the world, just like it wanted it here. They're going to have to fight for it. Trump will not hand over power without it being wrenched from him. But Seleucus establishes his dynasty. So this is when Antigonus goes to the borders. He's stopped by the descendants of Ishmael and the rise of Seleucus. So he concludes what is known as the Peace of the Dynasts, saying all of those dynasties made peace. The three he was fighting against: Ptolemy's dynasty, Cassander's dynasty, Lysimachus' dynasty, Antigonus's dynasty, all made peace because Antigonus needs to focus on Seleucus. He makes peace with all the others so he can fight Seleucus. Which is the history of this Babylonian war. At the end of it, Seleucus begins his own dynasty. It's known as the Seleucid dynasty. And he goes east, does a work, starts to rapidly expand territory. Just remember the counterfeit. God's people are in a scattering. We're a mess. We're about to come together. We know that God will restore. This is the cross. The disciples, they're restored, gathered together, unified. Pentecost, they begin to rise. All a preparation for the work for the Gentiles. The papacy, symbolized by Seleucus, following the same model because they're a counterfeit. They're a mess. They're going to unite, rise at the Sunday law, do a work. So the Third Diadochi War begins to connect to the study of the counterfeit. Then we come to World War I. So this is the Fourth Diadochi War, World War II, the Third Diadochi War, and now we'll cover World War I. So World War I is perhaps the most difficult because of the quantity of information. But we need to be able to follow our thread. You have two sides in World War I. just like you do in World War II. Two fronts. So there's Eastern Front and Western Front. Eastern Front and Western Front. And we have two sides. It's going to take us from before that war begins and show us how it developed. So the two sides in opposition are Germany and Russia. They're the same powers as in World War II. This just is World War I, it's not Stalin and Hitler. These two powers are in opposition, but these are united, Germany and Austria-Hungary. Both of them represent the United States. They show two sides of the United States in this history. One is Germany, which already connects as the King of the North. But we also have the story of the two-horned power, as it's broken. And the fight between these two united forces and Russia is about spheres of influence, particularly that of Serbia. Serbia has a great deal of aspirations. It's a Slav country, inhabited by the Slav people. But it's just one country. There are all these other territories. They're all Slav. And Austria-Hungary has control over all of them. It controls their economy. It manipulates their politics. These countries are tired of Austria-Hungary bullying them. So there's one particular country, Serbia, that's particularly frustrated with Austria-Hungary. These two have a bad relationship. Serbia has been supported by Russia. So Russia supports Serbia, but it's being bullied by Austria-Hungary. And Serbia has a plan. It wants to unite all the Slav countries into one Slav kingdom. Austria-Hungary sees that as a threat. If all these unite, they'll threaten Austria-Hungary. They have to stay broken up. And there's one country, Bosnia. It's a little bit broader than that, we'll just call it Bosnia. Serbia wants to begin by taking control of Bosnia and uniting them. Before they can do that, Austria-Hungary comes down and annexes Bosnia. This is known as the Bosnian crisis. It was a major catalyst, if not the major catalyst, of World War I. So Austria-Hungary takes this sphere of influence from Serbia who had wanted control of that territory. Come back to this history. We've already defined the United States. The King of the South defines itself. In the history of 1989 to 91, now it's in the Middle East. You have Iraq. Iraq has a bad relationship with the United States. They have been under the protection of Russia. They want to unite the Middle East. The United States sees that as a threat. There's one territory they wanted: Kuwait. So Iraq seizes Kuwait. The United States attacks them, forces them out, and takes control of Kuwait. So America took control of this sphere of influence. The way Austria-Hungary took Bosnia. Iraq was upset. Serbia was upset. The King of the South was too weak in that history to defend Serbia's interests against Germany. Russia was too weak in 1990, 91 to defend the interests of Iraq against the United States. So we're simplifying that history and going quickly. But I just want to mark the Bosnian crisis and place its application. 1989 to 91 is the Gulf War. Because Serbia leaves Serbia, the Slavs, of all of these different territories, now had a vendetta. They were now angry at Austria-Hungary. So out of them forms a terrorist organization known as the Black Hand. It's this event, the Bosnian crisis, that causes this terrorist organization to form, and they're going to attack Austria-Hungary. 1989 to 91. This is George Bush, the father. He does a speech where he's talking about this crisis and how the United States is now the global leaders. They're not going to tolerate Iraq and those Middle Eastern dictatorships. He does that speech September 11, 1990. Why did Islam strike September 11 of 2001? This was known as George Bush's speech on the New World Order. And America in control of the world. And his focus of attack is the Middle East. All surrounded this first Iraq war. So I'll recap. There's conflict between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary takes a sphere of influence that Serbia wanted. There's conflict between Iraq and the United States over Kuwait. The United States takes a sphere of influence that Iraq wanted. The Slavs are so angry at Austria-Hungary that they form a terrorist organization known as the Black Hand. These Islamic countries are so angry at the United States, people are going to come from within them and form a terrorist organization known as Al-Qaeda. The reason Al-Qaeda hates America so much is because America interferes with other countries. And their chief example is this crisis, the Gulf War. They know about that speech. They hate America for that speech, which was September 11 of 1990. So when they strike, they've got to choose the anniversary, September 11, 2001. So from this crisis, you're going to see the Black Hand develop. From this crisis in the Middle East, you're going to see Al-Qaeda develop. This is why I wanted to make sure we could separate the Taliban from Al-Qaeda. Not the same thing. The Black Hand decide to strike against Austria-Hungary by assassinating the Archduke, Franz Ferdinand. And that's June 28, 1914. So the terrorist organization strikes. September 11. And then you're going to have the response. Austria-Hungary already wanted to go to war with Serbia. They were looking for an excuse to go to war with Serbia. The people of Austria-Hungary hated Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand. His own family hated Franz Ferdinand. His country did not mourn him. But they needed an excuse. They found their excuse. So they're determined to have a war with Serbia. But if they just do it based on this, other countries are going to protest, particularly Russia. So what they're going to do is send an ultimatum. They're going to send an ultimatum to Serbia and say, if you don't do as we tell you, which was really surrender sovereignty of your country, surrender control of Serbia, give Austria-Hungary full control of Serbia, we will destroy you. That's essentially their ultimatum. Because of this crisis, you find the United States sends an ultimatum. It's another ultimatum. It's not the UN to the United States. It's the United States to Iraq. And they said, surrender control of your entire country. You have so many hours for Saddam Hussein and his sons to exit Iraq, or we will come down and take control of the country forcefully. Serbia complied with most elements of this ultimatum, but not all. Iraq complied with most of the ultimatum, but not all. Neither wanted to completely surrender their country. So here, the war begins. The war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. But it didn't stay Austria-Hungary and Serbia. Within days, it became Austria-Hungary and Germany against Russia and against the West. So it became a war on two fronts. From here, at this Iraq war. So World War I says the war began here. I'll draw that after because we have to put in some more details. Louder, project. They have to hear you at the back wall. So 2003, this war begins on two fronts. We can speak about the Western Front. I want to focus on the Eastern. Germany, Austria-Hungary, they're united against Russia. Germany has a plan of how they're going to overthrow Russia, win the Eastern Front. So I will draw it here. This is the Eastern Front. Germany versus Russia. Germany's having some problems fighting on two fronts. So they decide they're going to use different tactics. They're going to end the war on the Eastern Front by causing internal problems in Russia. So what they want to do is take this man who's hiding out in Switzerland, this rebel who's threatened to overthrow the Tsar, and they want to send him into Russia to overthrow the Russian government. That man is Lenin. Vladimir Lenin was hiding in Switzerland. He'd been hiding there for about 10 years, banished from Russia, because he wanted to overthrow the Russian Tsar. So Germany finds him in Switzerland. they decide they're going to put him in a train, seal all the windows, seal the doors, and they're going to post him from Switzerland into Russia. So Germany finds Lenin, puts him on a train, posts him through to Russia, knowing that he'll overthrow the government. And he's already promised if he takes power, he will end the war with Germany. He takes power of Russia. On November 8. We've been in a war with Iraq from with Russia from 2003. Want to ignore the Western Front for this study. World War I says the Eastern Front began here. If you listen to Vladimir Putin speak, he'll speak about invading Ukraine. It's this story from the Fourth Diadochi War, the Pyrrhic War. They invade Ukraine. People accuse Vladimir Putin of invading Ukraine against international law. And his response is, the United States invaded Iraq against international law. It's here that Vladimir Putin turns against the West. You can go to external sources that will tell you that. It's here that Putin starts to fight against the West. Before the invasion of Iraq, he'd been trying to work with them. But here they turn on each other. He comes up with a plan. He's at war with this country. He's not doing well under Obama. He won't do well under Clinton. But there's this other fellow, Trump, who promises to drain the swamp, bring American troops home from war, restore the relationship with Russia. Vladimir Putin is going to facilitate that. Without Putin, Trump would not have won that election. Without Germany, Lenin would not have overthrown the Tsar. Lenin overthrows the Tsar on November 8. That government, the Tsar had stepped down, but the government is overthrown. Trump overthrew the government on November 8. We speak about November 9. You can use both dates depending on your story. November 9 is a story of a dictator. But the 2016 election was November 8. The winner is declared November 9. But that's just counting the votes. Begins here. So, the King of the South, remember this is failure. World War I is failure. We need to swap. But here, Germany's losing the war. It's fighting on too many fronts. So they decide to overthrow Russia from the inside by helping Vladimir Lenin. Putin is not winning this war with the United States. So he's going to end it by sending in Trump. Overthrow the government. Drain the swamp. And he does just that. Lenin ends the war with Germany at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. At this treaty, Germany and Russia make peace. But it's at a great cost to Russia. It's Russia that loses a great deal of territory, people, and resources. So this peace costs Russia. This is a treaty, peace, between the United States and Russia. This is failure, this is success. This is peace, but it comes at a great cost to the United States. You have to swap between failure and success. Peace, but it's a cost to the United States. It makes peace, but to do that, it must surrender the spheres of influence. So we need to come back and discuss this waymark. Because World War II says that 2019 was a battle, the beginning of war between the United States and Russia. World War I says it's not a battle, it's a peace treaty. And the war concludes, doesn't begin. World War I gives you an Eastern Front from 2003 to 2019. World War II gives you an Eastern Front from 2019 to 2021. These two world wars, they fit like a hand in a glove. And particularly when you come to 2019, they show every facet of what that can look like. Trump lost spheres of influence. He lost an information war. Is that a peace treaty? Or a battle? We don't have time in this, our 8 minutes left. But both perspectives are correct. They complement each other. This is a victory for the King of the North in a history of failure. This is a history for the King of the South in a history of success. But the King of the North is going to lose in a history of failure. And Germany loses the war. And this treaty, where Germany got all these spheres of influence, is thrown out. Russia gets back what it had lost. So we mark the end of World War I, the end of World War II. But there's a process. Germany doesn't know how badly it's lost. It won't know until the Treaty of Versailles. In 1919. It says 1918, 1919. Germany doesn't know how badly it's lost until the war is formally ended at Versailles. So I don't want to spend any longer on that because we are already running out of time. When you take this model, come back to here. Acts 27 took us to these wars, the wars of Pyrrhus. It gave us witnesses to take us to World War II. That helped unlock the triple application. Project. World War I plus World War II equal World War III. You have to combine them. The Third and the Fourth Diadochi War give us a second witness. So it's just not World War I, World War II equals World War III. It's these two plus these two equals this. And then it gives us added information about the history just after the war. From Panium to Sundayloo, as the King of the South falls and dies. So very briefly, we've taken these four and we've laid out the history. It probably looks like a mess on the board, but it fits like the pieces of a puzzle. The way World War I connects with World War II. The way World War II emphasizes the final part. World War I emphasizes how it began. Each one adds a different layer. They explain the Eastern Front in its two parts. If you were to just focus on this line, the application, it gives us a complete view of the relationship between Russia and the United States. They were two superpowers at war. They went into this proxy war in Afghanistan. The United States overthrew the Soviet Union, taking control of the eastern satellite states. It overthrew it from the inside. It used the papacy and the mujahideen. Directly after that deadly blow is struck, it starts taking control of one sphere of influence that does not want America's control. That is Iraq. In the Middle East, there's this conflict as America keeps interfering. The Soviet Union is too weak because it's falling to defend the interests of Iraq. So America takes control in the Gulf War, acting like a dictator. The UN isn't happy. The countries of the Middle East are not happy. A terrorist organization forms. Al-Qaeda. The Taliban take over Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda is going to attack America at September 11 as a response to this September 11. The United States is going to go into Afghanistan, overthrow the Taliban. You're going to have, in this history, a breakdown in the alliance between the papacy and the United States. Three leading members of the UN going to write to the United States and say, work with us, don't do your own thing. The United States is going to ignore them. It's going to send an ultimatum to Saddam Hussein saying, give us control of your country or we will invade you. And they do. The Iraq War begins. This becomes a war that develops into an information and proxy war as Vladimir Putin turns against the West. From 2003, you have Vladimir Putin fighting against George Bush in all these proxy areas, and then a very bad relationship with Obama and Clinton. In 2014, he's going to invade Ukraine. And at the same time, he's going to go into an alliance with Donald Trump. Then he's going to send Trump into the United States government, into the office of president, to overthrow the establishment, surrender the spheres of influence they've been fighting over since 2003, and make peace between the two countries. Their relationship is strained. It breaks down. But they patch up their differences until here, where the King of the North, Donald Trump, is going to fight with Vladimir Putin. You can call it a battle or a peace treaty. Both are accurate depending on your perspective. But the King of the South, Vladimir Putin, is going to take all the spheres of influence from Donald Trump. If you want to call it peace, know that it comes at a cost. But Vladimir Putin is going to lose these spheres of influence. Donald Trump is going to fight him to the borders of Russia, at which point Trump is distracted by Islam and the rise of the papacy. So he only goes to the borders. That's all he needs to do. That's the deadly wound. Russia will fall from Panion to the Sunday Law. You can see the whole history from 1979 to the Sunday Law, all laid out by these lines. Once you add them together, it forms a complete story of the relationship between the King of the North and the King of the South. This is all constructed using line upon line methodology. I want to show you a different study. Whenever I teach this study, I put enough information on the board that you can see its complete lines laid over our line. It's lines over lines. And at each waymark, there's enough information that you know what happened. You might feel overwhelmed if you're not familiar with this study, that there's a lot of information. But if you didn't know this study, you can take a photo of this board and reconstruct it entirely on your own. All of the information is given that's necessary. I'll construct a different line. It's going to begin August 3rd. And this is using the Gregorian calendar. It's July 27 in the Julian calendar. So you have the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar. Gregorian, August 3rd. Julian, August 27. The year is 1299. 26 days, 4 months. 26 days, 10 months, 698 AH. I don't know what AH means. 150 years. Another date. July 27. This time, it's the Gregorian calendar. The Julian calendar is July 18, 1449. 26 days, 4 months, 360 years. July 27, 1809. That's the Julian calendar. There's no reference to the Gregorian here. 26, sorry, this was 26 days. This is 26 days, 4 months. So from here to here is, no, this is 4 months as well. 26 days, 4 months. So they're linking 26 days, 4 months. Then you have 30 years. To July 27, 1839. And that is the Julian calendar. July 27, 1839. 26 days, 4 months. To July 27, 1840. That's 1 year. 12 days, 6 months. But they're not using the Gregorian or the Julian calendar. It's a third calendar. This is an Islamic calendar. I have to correct that. Have to move this one. It's 26 days, 4 months. But then you have from July 27, 15 days. And here's a date we know, August 11, 1840. And here's where they jump to the Islamic calendar. 12 days, 6 months. Then they're going to talk about 38,360 days. 38,360. 1299 months. 38 equals 3. I'm lost here. Sorry. 3 days, 8 months. 38 equals 3 days, 8 months. 360. Year for a day. So I suspect that's a fourth calendar. We don't have room, this is only half of it. I'll just put a couple here so that you know from here down to here is 666 lunar years. How many calendars is that now? 5. Is there any reasonable reason To jump between 5 different calendars. No. There is no reason for it. Just know that if you double this line, not quite, another third, they'll take you to July 18, 2020. And prior to this, these waymarks that I've missed for room all relate to World War II. So that's how they use World War II in their methodology. Now, I believe that while our studies may seem complex, most of you have seen the 25-20 presented this week. It can be a lot of information. I would still argue, even if you can't understand all that's happening, it makes common sense. 1989, God opened up reform lines. Now this is my final presentation. We defended this movement by going through those original reform lines. Moses, John and Christ, Miller Snow, Jeff Parminder. We placed the reform lines in a way that was watertight, line over line. And moved from that, we showed how in every dispensation there's this one message that starts innocent, becomes a test. It's that message that plows. The message of the early rain, the message of the latter rain. It falls into patterns. All of this study began to open up in that dispensation as we went from Acts 27 to understanding the King of the South. So first of all, we talked about reform lines. Defended the movement from them. These are not lines of reform, but they explain our reform line. Because our reform line, from 1989 to the Sunday law, is Daniel 11 verse 40. And Daniel 11 verse 40 is the story of who? The king of the north and the king of the south. Not Islam. So if we're in Daniel 11 verse 40, I agree we have to understand Islam, but shouldn't we understand the king of the north and the king of the south? Comprehensively. That's what God has opened up. This is all Daniel 11 verse 40. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those machines where it looks like this tiny package, and then you press something and the whole thing just blows up into something huge. That package is Daniel 11 verse 40. Once it's investigated, this history of the king of the north and the king of the south, through line upon line, which was the first thing God gave to this movement, it blows up. And this is the result. knowing there's other studies on the King of the North and the King of the South. But this is the one for our dispensation. This methodology, even if it feels like a lot of information, it doesn't matter how new you are, how smart you might think you are, it can make sense. And I trust every single one of you could take this thought, take a photo of this, take it home, investigate it, and recreate it. It's based on solid methodology, multiple witnesses. This is the counterfeit. That's what they have to offer. I've taught well before this study even began that the number 27 has a special meaning in prophecy. It's Acts 27. At each point through the opening up of that study, the number 27 was unavoidable. But I don't hang my study on it. Till I understand it, don't really teach it. I think there's a connection. But their study hangs on numbers. I haven't left any information out of their chart up to here when we ran out of room. What even is this event? They don't tell you. The reason they teach this way, construct charts this way, is because if they gave all the information, people would say how ridiculous it is. I'll give you an example. This is all a study of Islam, yes? It's a study of Islam. Why are they discussing World War II? It's because if they do one of their many calendars and find any number they think might be significant, they'll take you to World War II and you'll see Japan. And how does Japan fight? With kamikaze pilots. They sound like suicide bombers. So Japan, because of kamikaze pilots, equals Islam. That's the strength of their methodology when they approach World War II. This type of study is numerology. It hangs on no constructed lines. They've gone into World War II. This history, they've cut out Japan from the whole context, seen kamikaze pilots, equated them to suicide bombers, equated them to Islam, gone to at least 5 different calendars to pull out any numbers they find significant that have no meaning to give to the story to construct Islam, July 18, 2020. The reason I can see this is ridiculous is because this is the only piece of information on this whole chart that even indicates what type of story they're trying to tell. If you find this reasonable methodology, I'm concerned for you that you would think this is how God teaches his people. I've spoken to people who follow FFA. They do not know this study. You can't find a proper series of presentations where they lay out their logic to do this. This has been presented either in a condensed form or in its full version, time after time after time. So if you follow this movement, you know how we study, the methodology we use, the conclusions we come to. You can go to the history, you can reconstruct it. People have done that. They've presented it. They've been able to defend it from their own investigation of those histories. The original architects of this aren't even willing to present it properly, because it would either show their ignorance or open them up to ridicule. And yet, because what we have presented, people find too hard to swallow. You find that people feel they have no choice. I'll remind you, this is the cross. At the cross, no one wants to side with a crucified Redeemer. So the Sadducees, the Pharisees, everyone puts aside their differences and unites. What FFA teach, their followers are not united on. They have taught 2020 is Panium, but there is no Raphia. They have taught we are in the harvest period. But for this crop, it's special. Quoting them, there was no latter rain. These types of crazy claims Michael stands up November 9. They are not united on these. I would argue they're not even united on this. But they're all going to unite, not because they believe the same thing, but because they must unite to oppose this movement. So, from the beginning to the end of my presentations, it's been based upon line. We've gone through the history of Moses and Joshua, John and Christ, Miller and Snow, made application, showed other evidences, shown the progression of the messages in the dispensation of the priests. They can't even do that. They don't like these studies. What was their latter rain message? They don't have one, which is why they have to teach we're a special crop. We are ripened without a latter rain. And then they have to construct this. The only message they have is based on Islam. And the reason they can teach on Islam is because they're apostate Protestants. And it's the favourite subject of Steve Bannon, who leads apostate Protestants. But they have changed their methodology. I've said before, there is a right way and a wrong way to look at the stars. Astronomy and astrology. There is a right way and a wrong way to use numbers, mathematics, numerology. And there is a right way and a wrong way to use history. To cut out pieces that suit you based on this type of logic out of a whole line and use multiple calendars with no rhyme or reason to just juggle numbers and create a study that hangs only on numbers. They've used history. We use line upon line. Not history. That's disconnected from the line. People think the midnight cry was about November 9. I'll remind you, November 9 was created by lines over lines over lines. But the midnight cry from the king of the north and the king of the south to equality was all about line upon line. Let's change the language. World War II. What is it? Natural. This is spiritual. And what is that methodology? Parables. So the opposition claim we use parable teaching. We no longer use line upon line. The problem is they don't know what line upon line even means. Parable teaching is line upon line. It's World War II as a line over World War III. It's World War II as the natural over World War III, which is the spiritual. It's World War II as a parable over World War III. It's the methodology of Jesus, of the second angel. Parable teaching is just a refined way of understanding line upon line. There is nothing parabolic about this. It's self-evident. How many lines is this? 1. Easy. It's not line over line. It's numerology through history. Their own people don't even understand this. And the little bits of methodology they allow us to understand, like this, show how weak those arguments are. I don't even know how to convince people of how foolish this is. Because if people believe this over how God has led this movement from 2009, 2012, 14, 16, 18, they choose this over what God has revealed to this movement, they're not siding with FFA because they believe FFA. They're siding with FFA because they don't like the conclusions of what we teach. And at that point, I can help no one. Because they're never going to listen to a reasoned argument. I hope that we can all see how God has led. I am in awe of the last 31 years. You can fill in all of the internal through those 3 reform lines. You can show all of Daniel 11 verse 40 through the triple application. He's taught us line upon line, just as he promised from the beginning, 31 years ago. He's never taught us like this. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you for how you have led, how you prove to your people what is correct. We know the work of Jesus was to use parables to teach his people what the nature of the kingdom was like. We see that you are using that exact same methodology in the final generation. Lord, I pray that we will not fight against this. Lord, we know that many people are in opposition to this movement. They do not like the conclusions of what we teach. They have been swept away by the flood of the Sunday law. We love our brethren. We desire to win them back to you. I pray, Lord, that they might be won back, that they'll see through the disinformation that is spread about what we believe and what we teach. May they see the hand of God in the messages as you have led this movement, that you did not allow us to go astray for false prophets to come in. But Lord, you have, if people are willing, led this movement step by step. I pray, Lord, that we will trust it now and into the future, that whatever comes, we will find our anchor in these lines, knowing that you have led, and the lines say that you will never stop leading, all the way to when we see you again and we get to go home. Please bless the remaining of our Sabbath hours and our fellowship that as we have this last day together. In Jesus' name, amen.